Okay, section 2, we're going to continue reading with John Jeckovich. His book, The Mother's Sons, we're on page 15, and it's entitled Book Girls and the Police. Though these little finding episodes became quite good friends, I look forward to going to the store after school to see and talk to her at times, disappointed when she had the day off. I became physically as well as emotionally aroused when I heard her distinctive footsteps. Hello. Approaching my stock desk. And when she was close enough for me, it was a sheer delight. As we got better acquainted, my inhibitions dissolved somewhat and we became more intimate. As we were looking for some hardware item with rarely anyone around, we would touch one another. It was a natural progression to embrace and kiss her. I can recall many times when I carried a basket of hardware up to her counter and we would exchange loving glances. As I slid the basket down the counter, I would touch her leg and she turned to give me a little smile that I can remember to this day. The height of my enjoyment with Jessie was the time we shared lunch. This was usually a long lunch day, and we would stroll to the falls hand in hand and walk along the tree-lined pathways, listen to the sound of the thundering falls in the background. We talked about many things, but especially what we wanted to do when we left our present employment. She was decided that my next several years would be pretty self-evident. In another year I would be drafted, and if in the interim I did not enlist in some branch of service. My entire senior year at school was preoccupied with Jessie. She did not go to the same school as I did. Therefore, the only times we rarely see her at work, and the several times we met somewhere else. On her last lunch period and the last Saturday she worked, on the last lunch period and the last Sunday she worked, we promised each other that we would keep in touch. As we sat closely on one of the benches at the falls, the final Saturday afternoon, she told me that she would always remember me, and we embraced and I kissed her. I detected several teardrops on her cheeks. I cherish all the memory I had with Jessie for the longest time. That was the last time I saw Jessie.
Jessie Zell, huh?
And we never communicated again. I do not know what became of her. Upon graduation, I quit my part-time job at the store with much agony and despair and put all the fond memories behind me. It was time to go to real work, and my mother would instill me on a daily basis. My mother would say, if you get tired, I'm tired of carrying the full load in support of this family. It's time you do your share. You have it easy enough up to now. I was perplexed. Where would I go? What could I do? I had no real skills, nor did not have an extensive education. Besides my age, no one would hire me due to my draft status. One morning I was going down the stairs from our upstairs apartment, thinking about when I might go look for work, and then suddenly opened the door from upstairs. It was Patricia, the wife of the family occupying the downstairs flat from my parents. She asked me if I was would look into the electrical plug in her kitchen. I, I immediately noticed that she was wanting me to fix the plug. She must have noticed my attentive glance at her. We made some small talk related to my parents' work, and then we somewhat alone in our apartments. I remarked when she approached I was on my way out to look for work. As she directed me to the defective plug, I could see by its blackened appearance that it had been shorted out. I told her that I would have a spare in the basement tool drawer. I noticed that I do not believe I stared at the sight of there. She once again At that moment I heard a blast horn outside on the street in the front of the house. Her ride came up to take her to the meeting. She quickly jumped up and at first glanced in the mirror on the wall. She did several things to her face, then transversed the kitchen door leading outside. She shouted over her shoulder, "Fix the plug and be sure to lock the kitchen door," and I had finished fixing the plug.
What happened?
I'm turning the page. I helped them move out to their new home. Although Patricia was only a few miles away, I never contacted her nor did I see her again. Lucky I obtained work at the second week after I completed school, and several weeks I quit the department store. I was hired by a state employment agency by a small sheet metal shop not too far from where I lived. It was one of those all-around metal shops which did everything from pertaining to sheet metal. Would you read that for me? Sheet metal. They all had since gone completely out of existence. These small shops had several specialty divisions within their nucleus. For example, there was one fabricating sections and that did the complete layout and the installation and huge desk below system for the various industrials surrounded our city. There was also a heating and air distribution section which was mainly converting coal-fired furnaces to oil. There were also installed related ductwork associated with this type of system. Also located in a little shop was a gutter and downsport section, which naturally did the construction and installation of gutters and downsports, most for commercial and residential. There were other specialty techs in the shop, but they're mostly of an overlapping nature. All in all, there were about 10 to 15 regular employees at this shop, which had been in existence for 35 to 40 years. The owner was a short, robust, cigar-chewing German by the name of Charles Croisdale. His brother Art also worked there as a truck driver and general parts man. Charlie knew nothing about designing or installing ductwork or the other sundry facts of the business, but he did have the outside contacts to bring a new business. And over the years he built a reputation as a reliable sheet metal shop owner. Over the years he built a reputation as a reliable sheet metal shop owner. It was only through the men that he had employed that his reputation was a reality.
That was your uncle.
Yeah. And his business became a striking success. I started there as a sheet metal helper at the rate of pay that I never achieved before this time. My mother was overwhelmed, and she would say, I finally made something of myself. She is something. Should I never leave this job? And I should never leave this job. I did not think it was such a great job, but to appease my mother, I did not look further for more gainful employment. Charlie would schedule me first with his specialty group, and then after a week or two with another. I never got scheduled with the industrial section until I'd been there for several months. My first assignment was with Louis, the gutter man. Louis would show me how to build a charcoal fire in a small portable stove and heat the large irons that soldered the various connections, the gutters and downspouts. Soldering large commercial gutters was tricky and required considerable amount of practice and skill. Bach was the furnace man, who did mainly residential hot air furnaces and duct work. I learned how to bend sheet metal in a square or round ducts, and then to reinforce it with a hand to metal, keeping it rigid and secure. Most of these tasks took us out of the shop environment and into establishments where the end product was installed. There was considerable preparatory work involved before the results could be achieved. The inside shop work became routine after a while, and time would drag on as compared to the outside work. We were only at the shop where only one or two people were working, and there was not the constant supervision or business-like attitude so prevalent back at the shop. Many times we would go a week or two without going to the shop at all. Art would supply us the material and everything else we needed to complete the job. About the third month there, I was assigned into the industrial section.
Industrial section, I wonder what they did there.
What did they do at the industrial section?
What did they do at the industrial section?
Huh?
What did they do at the industrial section?
Worked in the factories.
Okay.
Put stuff into the factories. Duct work, all kinds of stuff.
Did you like working in the factories?
I worked at every factory in Buffalo, Niagara Falls.
What kind of work did you do there?
I was with Croydale. I was putting duct work on all over, up 30-foot ladders and scaffolding and everything else. Fell off the roof once.
Oh no. How many people were helping you?
How many? Just me and my uncle.
Okay.
My uncle and I.
About a third a month, I was assigned to the industrial section. Heading up this section was my Uncle Andy. My uncle had seen me about the shop for the past several months, but did not acknowledge my presence. Neither of my parents had spoken to my uncle for several years, even though they lived a short distance apart from one another. How come they didn't talk?
Beats me. I don't know. That was my mother and Andy.
That was your mother's brother.
Yeah.
Then why didn't your father talk to him?
Well, my father was just as bad.
Didn't want to talk to him.
Yeah.
So when your uncle seen you working in Croydale's for several months, he didn't even say hi to you.
Who?
You were working in Croydale's, and your Uncle Andy noticed you there, but during those first 2 months, he didn't say nothing to you.
No. Well, I wasn't working with him. I was on the other team, so-called.
After several weeks of changing sections, as usually the case, Charlie informed me I'd be working with the steady with my Uncle Andy. I later found out that Uncle Andy had requested me permanently. That was nice.
What?
Uncle Andy requested that you work with him. I learned a lot of working with my uncle and was constantly amazed at the skill he displays in doing his work. While working with him, I found out to my surprise that he had gone only to the 3rd grade.
Yeah, 3rd grade. That's the old time I went to school, that time of the year, that time of the season.
He would do intricate mathematical layouts in the shop and then take these same fabrications and install them on the job site perfectly. On several occasions, he would drop me off from work at his home, and I would then walk from there. At times, he would invite me in, and I would meet Aunt Sophie and enjoy a piece of lemon meringue pie
Oh,
and a
yeah.
cup of office, and
Yeah.
they were always cordial and pleasant. Now, your Aunt Sophie was talking to your mother, right?
Huh?
Your Aunt Sophie always talked to your mother, right?
Yeah, they were all talking. They always yakking
But
on one
her
another.
brother and her weren't talking. Aunt Sophie would talk to your mother,
Yeah.
but your brother, Andy, your mother and Andy didn't talk.
Well, they were arguing when they were kids. So they argued when they were adults.
Why do you think that was it?
Huh?
Why do you think they always argued?
The what?
Why do you think they always argued?
Why were they always arguing? I don't know. Fill in the time.
They were what?
Fill in the time.
Uncle Andy Uncle Andy would show me about his home and some of his handiwork. The cement block garage he had built and remodeled, kitchen or basement workshop were some of the many items he was involved in. I would tell him how impressed I was and what he had shown me, and wish that I could do some of the things he was capable of doing. He would only smile and state that anyone that had the ability to do what he had done. The modesty and gentleness of this man overwhelmed me. I then realized that for the first time, here was a person I could relate to and respect. I worked and learned much from Uncle Andy, and I left for the service. I never returned with him again. I never returned to work with him again. He passed away shortly after I got out of the service. He was the enigma presented to me. Uncle Andy was my mother's brother, both of equal temperament and background, yet they're so completely opposite. Granted, they both had terrible tempers, but they utilized it in different directions. I had never seen my uncle display a temper tantrum like my mother was capable of. She would rant and rave and be no point to what she was upset about. On the other hand, when Uncle Andy became irritated, he'd quickly get out of control and leave, or try to explain his action for it. I wish my mother was a little bit more like my Uncle Andy.
Uncle Andy.
I can still recall Uncle Andy sitting on the grass along the bank of the little creek that ran through the extreme end of the city.
Real quick.
Yeah, he would just sit there by himself, looking around as if he was waiting for someone to talk to him or acknowledge his presence there. I would see him sitting there, Although I wanted to go and sit beside him, something also compelled me not to do it. It was not as if my parents were still feuding with him and not talking. They had both got over that a while back, and frankly they were almost friendly to both Uncle Andy and Aunt Sophie. I think it was mostly my way of not going back to work with Crosdale and not working again with my uncle. He resented my not coming back, but would never say anything directly to me about it. I felt bad in that returning, but I decided when I was still in the service that I would not return, instead try to better myself and seek some type of schooling, but at college or some other avenue. As it turned out, I was not too successful in either approach. Ironically, I finally settled into a lot of work, not to my liking, in which is day-to-day contract with my uncle's brother's John, but I never attained a rapport that I enjoyed with Andy. Minutes?
8.
Police headquarters had just called and advised your husband dropped dead of a heart attack and his body's at St. Mary's Hospital. This was the communication my mother received while at work approximately 9:12 p.m. on October 9th, 1943. It was written on the back of a
Work order.
Just a minute, I have to find some pages. Okay, here we go. Police headquarters just called and advised my mother, your husband just dropped dead of a heart attack, and his body is in St. Mary's Hospital. There was a communication to my mother received while at work at approximately 9:12 p.m. on October 9th, 1943. It was written on the back of a purchase order slip for my mother used in her work at the plant. An hour earlier, I received a different type of notification relative to my father. So the plant notified your mother on like a purchase order that your husband's dead.
Yeah.
And that was it. Here's the note.
Yeah.
On the back of a purchase order.
Yeah.
Purchase slip my mother used at the work at the plant. An hour earlier, I had received a different type of notification relative to my father. As I worked later than usual with my uncle at Carborundum plant, I did not arrive home in time to accompany my father that evening, as it was customary for me to do. I had worked home for only a short while, and when there was a knock on the front door, as I opened the door, there was a uniformed policeman standing there. He asked me if I knew Marion Jeckovich. I stated that I did. He was my father. He informed me that my father had taken into an accident and been taken to the emergency room at the hospital, then asked if I would accompany him there. I immediately told my sister to accept all incoming calls, especially from my mother. Both my brothers were not home, and I then went to the police with the policeman to the hospital. When I arrived at the hospital, I was directed to what do I believe had been the emergency room. Instead, I was ushered into the downstairs room. As I entered a large room, I noticed the floor was covered with red quarry tile, and the walls were also tiled from the floor to the ceiling in greenish blue hue. From the ceiling were hung large diameter arc lights that illuminated the entire room, as well as 5 or 6 marble-type benches dispersed throughout the room. All the room was completely covered with glassed cardboard cupboards and compartments. One of the attendants motioned to me over to the motionless outstretched figure on one of the marble tables. On the nearest table was what appeared to be another figure covered entirely in a white sheet. As I approached the table, I recognized my father laying there. He had a grayish ashen look at his face. The arms were at his sides, and I could see the dried cement on both of his hands. Both his knees of his work pants were still damp from kneeling in the wet cement. His shoes were on his feet, laden with blotches of cement stain. His eyes were closed, and a wisp of his black hair was draped over one side of his forehead. He was fully clothed, just as he left for work several hours earlier. I asked the attending physician, "What is wrong with my father?" I saw no physical damage. He uttered in a rather matter-of-fact tone that my father had a massive heart attack and was dead. I did not react immediately to that shocking statement. Several minutes later, some attending physician asked me if I would verify the person lying there that was actually my father. I stated that it was, and he asked if I'd go through my father's pants pockets and retrieve all his belongings. I commenced to go through my father's pockets. As I was awkwardly proceeding with the task, I noticed how lifeless and a stiff body felt. It was different to reach the depth of his pants. It was difficult to reach the depth of his pants pockets. The attendant turned my father over to each side so I could retrieve anything in the back pockets. What I had taken from the pockets of my father was set on a small table at the end of the marble slab in which he was lying.
1 minute, 40 seconds.
It consisted of a red tin Prince Albert tobacco, an orange booklet of cigarette paper, a half dozen stick matches, a crumpled piece of brown paper, presumably from a shopping bag with an address on it, a wooden pencil with the lead tip broken off, and 28 cents in loose change. The attendant asked me to sign a property sheet and acknowledged there was an actual possession belonging to my father. I also signed another form that I witnessed and verified the body was my father, and then gave his full name, and I did not know his social security number. After all the formalities were over, I was escorted to the waiting room, and I was told that someone would drive me back home. After several minutes had passed, a uniformed policeman came to me and said he would drive me home. During that drive back, which did not take long, the only remark the policeman made was, "That's the best way to go." As I got out of the police car in front of the house, I thanked the officer for the ride and walked toward the house. I could hear my mother crying and sobbing inside incoherently as I walked in the house. My sister was also crying. There was no neighbors coming to our house or to console or comfort them, and nor were there any relations prior to the funeral. Time?
13 seconds.
My mother.
Where's Cher?
Claire? I
What?
don't know. I should go check on her.
Huh?
I should check on her.
My mother and I made a